Hi guys, this is Mike back with another Ruby on Rails tutorial for you, and we're basically going to carry on from last week's tutorial and extend this whole idea of an articles app that we're going to build. Now, last week we created a controller, and then we created some views for the controller, and we explained the different actions that are available to the controller. But this week we're actually going to add in a model, or a data model, which would then conform us to the MVC pattern for development. And this will also help us to plug in with the database that we created as well, and start creating entries and being able to edit them and delete them. So now that we've caught up on that, the thing we need to do to actually create our model, first of all, is from inside of our app folder, we call the Rails G for generate. Then instead of putting controller, we put the keyword model instead. Then the name of the model that we want to create. Now, after that, we give a definition of what the fields are going to be, and we do that in a pair. So we separate the pair by putting a colon in there. So you put the title, or rather the name of the field, and then its type. Now, in this case, the title is going to be a string, which is just a limited amount of characters. But our field body is going to be text, and text will then identify it as being able to be a varied length amount of text. So you can put a lot more text in there than you would be able to do in your title. A string's just a very short string, probably no longer than about 256 characters-ish. But text, obviously, can be pages and pages of information. So that's what we're going to do, create that model. Now, once we've done that, the system then creates in our project, excuse me, in the DB folder under migrate, it creates this migration file. Now, if we look in there, it's just Ruby, and it's a create articles class derived from active records migration class. And under its definition of the change function, we have create table, which is a function. So create table articles, and then we condense that down to the T variable so that we can do a bit of shorthand typing, and put dot string. Now, this code here is auto-generated, so you don't have to type this in, but this is what's created by our command that we did, the command line here. I'm just simply showing you that because sometimes it's helpful to go in there and maybe do a little bit of changes in the migrations by recoding them slightly, but at least you know where to get to them. So if you ever need to slightly modify a migration, that's where you're going to find them, under DB migrate. Okay, we're not going to touch that because we don't need to. There's no reason for us to make any differences to that. The only thing we need to do now that we've created the model is to call rake, which is the Ruby make program, which then goes through the system settings and does a bit of checking through all of the different things that you've changed. Like routing or DB database stuff. In this case, we're going to pass it the DB migrate function, or command line arguments. That's the word I'm looking for. And what that'll do is it'll cause it to go and look in that migrations folder and see what migrations are available, and it'll check because of the timestamp what comes before what. And it will apply those migrations that are inside of here. So you'll gradually build up a list of different files with different timestamps at the beginning, and they'll also have different titles. So this one's called create articles with the timestamp in the beginning. If you make any changes to the articles table later in the process, then you may see different things happening there. Or if you add other models to your system, then you'll see the migrations for them listed inside of this folder. So the rake DB migrate command goes away and applies those migrations to your database. So you don't physically go and touch the database yourself. You leave it up to the Rails process to actually do something about it. So that being done, we then can now start adding in some code to our articles controller. Now, the first thing we want to do is we want to create a variable that can then be used on our index page. And the way we create a variable that can be seen by the view is we do the following. We use the @ symbol to signify that this variable is not going to be just inside of the scope of this function, but is also going to be available outside in the view. So then we go articles, or @articles equals article all. Now that's our model. We don't have to import it or anything like that. Rails knows that there are models that exist, because it knows underneath this folder models that there's one there. So it automatically imports it. You just have to type its name and whatever function you need it to do. So article all basically does the equivalent of what you would see in SQL as select star from articles. And that's basically get every article that's in there and put it into this variable here, which you can think of as being equivalent to a list or an array in other languages. That's all we're going to do for the index there. On the index page, we've still got our title of the page, but now we're going to add some code just to basically list the articles and also add a link to be clicked so that you can create a new article and add it to the list. So the first thing we do is we do the equivalent of a Ruby for loop, which is basically each do and then a name of a variable inside of these pipe characters, and then obviously make sure it's ended. Now this is where it gets interesting, because I mentioned last week that these are embedded Ruby pages. So this is technically HTML, but we're embedding Ruby code inside, and the way that we make the system aware that this is actually Ruby code and not HTML is to add these. So there's the lower than % and then % greater than, and that basically says to the system this the lines of text in between these two markers are actually Ruby code that I've embedded into the HTML. So we signify the embedded Ruby by that. Again, we do still have to end our loop, so we have another set of open and close embedded Ruby tags with an end in there. So that's our loop, and we've assigned each instance of an article that's in this array into that single variable there, so that we can then use it within here. And what we're going to do is we're just going to output the title and make a link, so that you can click on the title and then follow it through to the page where we will show the rest of the information, like the body text and that sort of thing. So to do that, we use the link to function. So I'll just drop that in there. So we'll open it up with a paragraph tag, and then we use a slightly modified version of these embedded Ruby tags. As you can see, it's got an equal sign straight after the percentage. And what that tells Ruby, or what that tells Rails, is that this command actually outputs something into the HTML. So it's actually going to generate something that needs to be shown on the web browser page. This line here doesn't get shown on the web browser page, but this one does. Then we use Rails's link to function, and we pass it in some text, and the text we're going to use is the actual article title. Then followed by a comma, we're going to pass it the article, and then from that it will automatically go away and get the ID for that article. So it will do the thinking for you and get a hold of that article ID and process it all into a hyperlink with the text of the title as the bit that you can click. Okay, Then I'm just going to stick a horizontal rule in there just to separate them out so that we know which ones are which on the page. And then we use the link to function again, noting that I've still got that equal sign in there, so this still does output HTML. Link to, and then I've just added in a string myself, add article. And I've used something called new article path. Now, in Ruby, you can take advantage of its routing system. Now, what that means is that when we did our routes last week, we went into, if I can just find it, yeah, into the config and into routes.rb, and we added resources : articles. Now what that tells Ruby is that the articles controller has a bunch of URLs available that are possible, and then Ruby will then work out from this here that there are certain parts of this controller that are available. Now if we go to the command line and we use rake again, we do the rake routes command, it'll come back and tell us that there are possible URLs or URI patterns. So we've got articles, articles new, articles edit. Now the prefix is the interesting part, because when we do in our page, when we do new underscore article underscore path, actually what we're doing is we're making a reference to this prefix here, and all we're doing is we're taking that prefix which points to the new URL and we're putting underscore path on the end. So new article, then underscore path on the end, tells Ruby this is a recognized configured route within the system that you can use if with the link to function to automatically generate that URL for us. Now that's really handy, because if you're developing remote on your local machine and then you deploy to a remote server, it will take account of all the different URL changes and implement them for you automatically. So you don't necessarily have to start thinking about where's the path to this, what's the right URL for that. You leave it up to Rails to think about it, and it'll do all the work for you. So in that case, we're using new article underscore path from our routes section, where it says new article, as the prefix for underscore path. And of course, if you wanted to link to edit article, then that would be edit underscore article underscore path. Or if we want to link to a single article, then that's article underscore path again. And the index page is obviously articles underscore path. And you can see there they map along to the different actions as well, the controller actions in this column here. So you can see where they're mapped to as well. Okay, so that's the index page. That should show all of our articles in the database. The next thing to do is to start and configure these other actions and their relevant views. Now, show is the next one up. So let's put that in. Now, this one's slightly different. We're creating an article instance that we find using the find method in the articles database, and we use a special keyword called params. Now, if you've worked in other web languages, you might have seen things like in PHP you have the post array. In Python or Django you have things like the request has a post dictionary in there. So it's basically a big list of the various things that are being passed along the URLs. So if you have an ID in the URL, like you would do in the case of edit. So if you notice the URL pattern, or the URI pattern here, says articles ID edit, then in that case the ID is being passed along in this params option. So you'll find that this is generally the way you pull out things like variables that you put in a get string, or if your form does post method, then you'll find it in here if you're looking for that kind of information when you've passed information from one page to another. That's how it gets transferred with Ruby and Rails. So the show, we need to configure the view for that. So to do that, we're going to substitute last week's header for the actual title of the article. Now it's important to note I'm using that @ symbol in the view as well, so there's no missing out this @ symbol. It's very important in terms of when Rails goes through there, it will look for that and recognize that that's a variable that's been recognized in the system. If you don't put that there, then it has limited scope and will not be passed from this function here through to your view. So we're outputting again using the equal symbol after our embedded Ruby tags. That's the title. Then we just make a paragraph and output the body in there. Then we're going to output something called created at. Now, if you remember rightly, we did our command to create the model, and we passed in that there was a field called title and body, but we didn't create one called created at. And the reason why we still have this, even though we didn't specify it, is because if we look in the migration, as well as creating the title and the body, it also creates timestamps, and it creates two of those automatically for us. It creates created at timestamp, and it also creates updated at, and those are there basically so you can keep records of when things were saved and when things were created, and it'll do that automatically for you, so you don't have to do that by hand. The next part is that we're going to add a couple of links into the actual page. So this is the page where we're actually going to be able to read the article. But I'm also going to put two links on, one to let you edit the article and one to let you delete it. So the first one is link for the edit. So I'm using link to edit, which is a string, edit article underscore path, which is from our routing. Here we go. Edit article, and then we put the underscore path on for ourselves. And this time we pass in a parameter to that of the article itself, and it will then draw out the ID that it needs to link to for this particular article. So when you click this, it should then pass through to the right URL just here, and where it says ID there, it will substitute that for the correct ID for the article. The next link is the delete link. Now the delete link is slightly different because it uses the RESTful method of passing a delete. So if you don't know about HTML or HTTP delete or REST, then you really need to kind of have a quick Google around and work out what that is. But basically, it's meant to say that this is signified in our system as a proper delete command over the HTTP protocol from the browser to the server, which is very, very useful because then you can then identify things correctly and have them under a proper structure of the kinds of messages that you're sending to and from your servers. So we use the link to create a delete link. We're going to pass in the article so we can work out which specific article we want, and then we will then give it an extra couple of parameters. Now, with it being a delete, we want a little pop-up box to say, are you sure you want to delete this article? So to do that, we use the confirm parameter and say that it's equal to the string are you sure. And then finally, to make sure that Rails understands that this is actually an HTTP delete call and not a normal HTTP query, then it will actually, it's a HTTP GET call that we're trying to tell it that it isn't one of those. So we use the method and say the method's actually delete and not get, which it should be in normal situations, but in our situation for a delete it has to be specific. So we add that in. Okay, and I'll just end off by putting the end of there. Oop. Okay, so that's our show page done. So you'll notice there's very little code goes into the controller side for these basic things. The main thing is you're setting up HTML and showing how things actually link together. So if we move on to the new command, or new action, then all we're going to put in there is article equals article.new. Now new is a function, but we're not going to pass it any parameters because we don't want it to create it. We only want it to create a blank instance of an article. And the reason why we're going to do that is because in our new HTML, we're going to create a form. And the code that we use actually uses the blank article as an example of how or what kind of information should be generated for the form. So the way that we actually create the form is that Rails has a function called form4. Now form4 basically allows you to kind of introspectively look at this instance of an article that we've created in the controller, and then it will create a form that's a class that is capable of creating the HTML for us based on what kind of things are stored inside of article. So form4 article do, and then we make a small f variable name, and that's basically because it's very easy to just make some shorthand if you don't have a really long variable name, and it's not that important because we're just generating a form. So if I then add in the first line is again some embedded Ruby that's going to output the HTML using the forms label function. We're going to tell it that this label is going to be for the title field in the model. So it'll look inside of article and look for the title inside the article and know what that is and the associated text that's supposed to be in there. Then we close that tag and just put a semicolon in between. Then we open up some more embedded Ruby, and this time we use the forms text field function and tell it that this text field is for title. So that'll set up the form field in HTML and effectively output an input tag with the relevant IDs and all that sort of stuff for us. So this is a nice shorthand way of doing that, and we're pretty much guaranteed that that'll work out exactly the way we want it. Now the next line is for the body, so it's exactly the same line. We've just literally just changed it to say body, except for this. Because body is a large amount of text, we don't want a text field, we want a text area. So if you're familiar with text areas in forms, then you'll know exactly what that is. But it's just basically a box that's a bit larger than the normal one, so you can put multiple lines of text in there. Okay, so finally we use F's submit method to create a submit button, and we're going to have the text on there say add article. Now that's our new view. Now, as I explained last week, the new view creates a form like we've just defined, but then when you save, it doesn't get passed back to this method. It gets passed to the create method. So we need to put some code into create to handle the new information and create our article and save it. So, oops. Because of security restrictions, we need to add another method which basically handles what parameters are allowed to be passed in to our database. Now, we have a concept called mass assignment, where we can pass in multiple values into the model, and it will assign values all in one go, so hence the name mass assignment. But this can be abused, so we want to be able to protect the model from being abused, where people could put values in that are bogus or, in some way hack the system. So we want to just say that the only allowed parameters are really just the title and the body of this, and we don't want somebody to be able to mess around with the updated at or the created at timestamps. So to do that, we create another method. We're going to call it articles_params, and inside of there we're going to specify which parameters are allowed to be passed back when a form is posted. And to do that, we do params.requireArticle, so we require an article, and permit title and body to come through. And what that'll do is it'll return the values in the params array that are inside there for the title and the article. And that should then basically put some security in place to make sure that people can't pass in anything other than those two. So even if the other values like created at or updated at are inside of the form because somebody's hacked it, the values won't be passed through. They'll just be passed through only in the title and the body. And in our create method, we can now use this to do mass assignment of values. So first of all, in our create method, we create a new article, but we use our articles params function to get them out of the post array and put them into the new article and create an instance of that new article with the new values inside. Then we're going to use the articles save method, and if it's successful, we're going to redirect back through to here with a message. Now this message is going to show up in the main template or on the main page. So just after I've done this, I'll show you what that means. So first of all, we're going to use the redirect to function, which is part of the Rails setup or framework, and we're going to pass in the articles_path from our roots. Articles_path just basically takes us back to the index and shows all the articles, including the newly created one. But we were going to redirect, but we're going to pass in a notice. This is basically what they call a flash variable. So it's a one-time, one-shot only variable that exists for the next page only. But after that, any other refreshes or any other pages that try to access it won't be able to, because it won't exist inside of the server anymore. This is literally a one-off variable that's meant just for sending a message to the next page along. And we're going to say the notice is your new article is created. If the article didn't save, we're going to give it another try and re-render or render rather the new action again. So to do that, we just use the render function and put in the word new, and it knows that we want to then go back to this page and repopulate everything and start again. That gives the user another chance to do that. Now let's take a look at this notice thing. How do we actually show that notice? Well, in our layouts folder, under the views layouts folder, we have the main application layout, and that's this file here, and it has a bog standard set of HTML in there, and inside of the body tags you see the word yield. Now that's where all the other views, when they're rendered into HTML, will be placed. So this basically outputs the rendered HTML from our different views that we've created. But above there, we're going to add in some extra code to actually take care of these flash messages. So Ruby has, or rather Rails has, this flash array that it comes built in. And inside of there, it has two values for every message or flash message that's put in there. It has a name and a message, so we know what type it is. And inside of there, we're going to output using a function called content tag, which just basically decides based on what you pass it. And in this case, it's a div. It'll decide what that should be constructed like. We're going to pass in the message to there, so that will be the contents inside the div. And then we can assign it an ID. So that's a CSS ID. And the CSS ID will be flash underscore, and then we're going to actually pop in the name. Now this is how we embed things inside of a string. So we use the hash, the curly brace, and then the name of the variable, and then another curly brace. You might be familiar with something similar if you're doing PHP. So that's basically us embedding the value of this name variable into the string. So in the case of ours, we should get flash underscore notice, because that's what we've called this variable. So with that, we've now got a notification system so that we can send messages back now that we've saved stuff. And we've got a create URL that then creates this article and then passes back, if it's successful, back to the index page where the new article will be listed along with the other existing articles. So for the edit method, we're going to first of all get the ID from the params. Now notice you don't have to do security measures for this, because this is a default way of fetching a value from the models. So title and body are not default values that you would normally pass through, so they have to have some permissions applied to them. ID is expected, that's how you'll find things. So all we're doing is getting the article, and then we pass it all through using this variable here into the edit. And I've already typed that in because you'll see that it's more or less exactly the same as the new.html, except for a few changes. The only changes that there are really that this text on the button is different. So it just is save new article instead of add article. So it's exactly the same form, and in fact we could have probably avoided some duplication here, but I've just basically put it in to demonstrate that each one has its own different view. Okay, now as I said last week, the edit, once you put information into there or change the information that's on the form, when it posts back, it doesn't post back to the edit action, it posts back to the update action. So we're going to do the update function now. Okay, so you see it appears my undo history isn't as long as I would like it to be. Okay, so what we've got is we're going to cut and paste that bit here we're going to get the article out of the database, and then we're going to use another new function that's attached to the article, update attributes. Now this is the plural, because if we wanted to update one field we'll use update attribute, but this one we're going to update two attributes at the same time, the title and body. So we're going to use that, and we're going to use our article params to pull that out of there securely. If it's successful, then we're going to do a redirect. So I'm just going to cut and paste that off here. Your article was updated. It's not a new article. Excuse me. Got a bit of a frog in my throat today. And if that fails, we will render edit instead. Okay. So that's our edit and update functions done. So what should happen is the edit will populate this form that we've created here, put the right values in for the current record that we've selected. Then if we make any changes and click the save button, then it'll pass through to update, and update will do the code that we've just typed in there. Right, so the final thing that we want to look at is that in our show view we created a delete option, didn't we? So we need to take care of the delete action that's going to pass through to, and that one is just here. So again, we just want to get the article, so we can cut and paste that, and with article we want to call the destroy method. Now that should basically delete the record out of the database completely. And then the final thing we want to do is redirect back to our index page again and say your article was deleted. There we go. Okay, so that's basically all the functionality we need to create and list and read and update and delete an article using the framework. So let's have a quick look and see if that's going to work. Well, server's already running. Oh, that's interesting. Okay. Okay, I'm just going to pause whilst I sort this out, because it appears there's an unexpected instance of Rails as web brick already running. So just bear with me 2 seconds and I'll put that right. Okay, so managed to get rid of that unknown instance of web brick, and I've now got this running. So if we just go to our articles page, we now see that there's one test article in there. If we click on the add article, let's put some random text in there. So that's created the article, but it's also passed our flash message back saying your new article was created. If we go in there, we can edit changes. So I'll change that to word 2 instead of aha, and I have done some spelling mistakes. Okay, so put my spelling mistakes right. It's not spelled articles, it's spelled articles. Note to self, learn to spell. There you go. So Okay. So that seems to be working. Now, finally, let's test the delete method. So the delete, as you can see, passes back in the bottom left-hand corner. You can see the URL. It passes back to articles 5. Now, what's interesting is that we're already looking at articles 5. So what's the difference between a delete method to articles 5 and this normal? Well, the difference is the rest side of things. The restful side of things says that articles 5 in normal circumstances just shows the article. If we use an HTTP delete command, then it passes back to the same URL, but in Rails it recognizes that that's a delete command and not a view command, or a get command, I think is the one I'm thinking of. So that's why we have to change the methods inside of our show view to say method equals delete, because we want this to know that this is not just a normal callback to that URL, it's actually a delete callback. So if we click that, it gives us our message that we said, are you sure? If we cancel, nothing happens. So if we click OK, bang, it's gone. Okay, so that's the end of this tutorial. I hope that you learned a lot from this, and if you did, then please click the like button. And if you'd like to know more about the tutorials in this series, then please click the subscribe button, and we'll let you know as soon as the next one's out. Thanks for watching.